So today we're going to make a video on our still life assignment. And so the first thing we're going to be doing is going into our files. We're going to open up a raw image. How do we know it's a raw image? Because it's a CR2 file. A CR2 file is a raw image that has all of the information in that file. It is the raw data for that photograph that you took. It is the best quality image, and it will look like an kind of a you'll see kind of what looks to be a shutter, an aperture symbol on the front of the CR2 file. It'll say CR2 in the left corner, and then you'll click on that and you'll open it. What you're going to notice is that you have a Camera Raw 6.0 Canon EOS Digital Rebel. Well, that's the kind of camera you use, was the Canon EOS Digital Rebel XSI. And we're going to be processing the Camera Raw 6.0 image here. And the information's up here in the left corner. Alright, so we're going to look here at the right side, and we have temperature, tint, exposure, recovery, fill light, blacks, brightness, contrast, clarity, vibrance, and saturation. The first thing we're going to adjust is the recovery. We're going to move this recovery over, and I'm going to go all the way to 100% on the recovery. We're going to watch what happens to our histogram. So I'm going to click on my exposure, and I'm going to move it a little bit to the right. Look what's happening to my histogram. It's moving slightly to the right. If I move it to the left, it's going to move over on the left side, and it looks very dark. So we don't want that. We want our histogram to kind of be in the center here. So I'm going to move it a little bit to the right so that we have some peaks and some valleys, and it's mostly in the center here, falling off on the right and falling off a little bit to the left. So now I'm going to add a little bit of black just to intensify our blacks in our image. I'm going to add a little bit of contrast, a little bit of clarity. I'm going to do probably like a plus 10 or 15. I'm going to add a little bit of vibrance, maybe a plus 15, and add a little bit of saturation, maybe a plus 10 or 12. I'm not going to overdo it. So now I'm going to zoom in really close, and so that I really zoomed in on my my image. I'm going to come over here to this little symbol here. It's called a detail button. It looks like a green triangle. Going to click on that, and then I'm going to sharpen my image a little bit, and you'll notice some pixel information starts to develop in our image. So you can actually see the pixels showing up a little bit. And I'm going to see if I need to. I'm actually going to move my sharpening amount all the way to the left so it's 0. I'm going to move it a little bit to the right and just see what happens slowly but surely. I noticed that my sharpening starts to increase a little bit. And then I'm going to add a little bit of noise reduction, which is the luminance. I'm just going to move that over just a little bit to the right until I notice that my pixels have smoothed out just a tad bit. So maybe my sharpening amount would be about a 52, my luminance amount would be about 21. So now that I'm done with this, I'm going to go ahead and open my image. When the first thing we need to do, which is extremely important, is we need to duplicate our background layer by right-clicking on our mouse. We're going to right-click on our mouse. We're going to go to Duplicate Layer, and we're going to call it Working Image. Okay, so we've got our working image, and this is the layer that we're going to make all our retouching corrections on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in. Now, during this retouching process, I am going to put the video on pause so that you don't have to see me do everything, because it could be very time consuming. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click on my clone stamping tool, which is on my vertical toolbar. So I'm going to click on my clone stamping tool, make sure I've got that selected. I'm going to make sure my opacity is about 50% or so, or between 30 and 50% is good. Okay, and I'm going to so maybe like around 40. I'm going to make sure I have a reasonable size brush that I'm cloning with, because what I want to do is I want to clone the smooth fabric next to my wrinkles. So I'm going to click my Alt button and I'm going to move this over. So I'm going to start working on my left side over here. So what I'm doing right now is I want to get rid of some of these wrinkles that are in the fabric that are going to impact how my image looks. I don't want to have these dark, really ugly wrinkles. Okay, I want to get them out as much as I possibly can. So let's turn off our working image and we can see a difference now. Do you see a difference? Look at the left side of the image right here, the left side. If I turn off my working image, we can see the wrinkles. If I turn it on, we can see that they are starting to go away. So now I'm going to, this really dark wrinkle right here next to the tassel, I'm going to left click here, and I'm going to move it over. Left click, and you'll notice that I keep clicking the Alt button. And how do I know I'm doing that? Is because I see my target button. I constantly see that I'm reselecting another area to clone. My little target button. And the reason for this is because I don't want to create a clone stamping pattern, okay? A clone stamping pattern is when you clone the same thing over and over again multiple times, and it starts to make up a pattern of that clone stamping design, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to zoom in a little closer so that I can really get close on this wrinkle that's by this tassel here and really see what I'm doing better. So now let's look at our working image. Here's our working image with the retouch done. Here's before with that dark wrinkle, and afterwards. We can see a huge difference. So now I want to show you another tool that you can use. This is we're going to come over here and we're going to use our lasso tool right here. Okay, our top lasso tool, we're going to click on that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to draw a circle around the wrinkles I want to remove. So I want to remove this wrinkle right here. Now I'm going to come up here to Edit, Fill, and I'm going to select Content Aware. Okay? My normal mode, 100% opacity. I'm going to say OK. And you notice how that wrinkle just went away. So let's look at the difference. Here's before on my history. I'm going back on my history one step, and here's afterwards. So we can see a huge difference. So now I'm going to select this little wrinkle right here. This little dark wrinkle just right in this little area. I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, OK. And we got rid of that. Again, so I'm just going to keep going around. Edit. Now, you can do this if you find that you're having a difficult time with the clone stamping tool. But look what just happened. This little mark here, I'm going to zoom in a little closer so you can see what I'm talking about, is exactly the same mark as this one right up here. So what happened is these just became cloned. And this is what I'm talking about when I was saying that you don't want to create a clone stamping pattern. So we're going to have to undo that. We don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just select a smaller amount of wrinkle here. I'm going to go to Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and let's see what happens. Okay, so that's a lot better now. That works. I'm going to get rid of this little tiny wrinkle here. Edit, Fill, Content Aware, OK. And we can see, if I turn off my working image, that this cloth is starting to look a lot smoother. So I'm going to go put the video on hold, and I'm going to go in and just do a whole bunch of retouching, and then we'll come back and start adding on to our video. Okay, so we're going to come back, and now you're going to see a big change in this image. Here's the working image, here's before, here's the working image. I've gone in and done some more retouching, and I didn't want to have to videotape all of that because it's a bit tedious, but I'm going to do some more over here that I'm going to show you. So sometimes in the background on the fabric you're going to need to retouch some of the wrinkles, so I'm going to retouch some of these up here in the left corner and just smooth that out a little bit here. Up here as well, make sure these folds kind of are nice and smooth, and looking at them they look pretty good. Done a bunch of retouching on them already. So one thing you do have to watch for is the wrinkles around your still life object. So Over here on the left side, I have a little bit of wrinkles right next to the helmet that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to go in with a really tiny clone brush, and I'm going to just bring the brush right up to my still life object so I can smooth this out in here. One thing you want to be careful is that you don't accidentally clone your still life objects. You don't want to do that, so you just want to slowly but surely retouch and make sure that you don't accidentally clone your still life objects. You only want to be cloning the fabric. Okay, so I'm going to go around and look at all my edges around all of my objects. I see some areas in here that I'm going to be cloning. Alright, just take that. Okay. And just going around my objects and making sure that there's no wrinkles in and around the edge of my still life objects. Okay, so right in here. So if we back this out now, we can see that a lot of the wrinkles are gone. We've got some folds in the background, and if I turn off my working image, I can see that I've got a lot of wrinkles when I turn it off. And then when I turn it back on again, we can see that they've been smoothed out. So I'm going to see now if we're ready to do the next step, which is to add our blur effect. Okay, so the next step here is to add in our soft focus effect. Now you will notice that you have 3 options. You can do you can either do a Gaussian blur, a surface blur, or you can do a motion blur. Now, if you have a project that has a lot of wrinkles, I recommend that you use a surface blur because the surface blur will help to really hide that. If you have a project, if you want to just add a nice overall general blur, I would use a Gaussian blur. And if you have a project that has maybe a sports theme, and you want to show motion, I would use the motion blur. Okay, so on this example here, I'm going to do I'm going to be adding in a surface blur to this project. So I'm going to duplicate my working image, and I'm going to call it blur effect. And I'm going to come up here to filter, blur, surface blur. And I am going to over focus this. I'm going to really adjust the radius on this. It's going to be extremely blurry, okay? And that's okay because we're going to reduce this down. So we want to really blur it out a lot. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my opacity, and I'm going to adjust down the blur effect on my opacity once the progress is completed. Alright, so I'm going to come over here to my opacity, and I'm going to adjust this down a little bit so that my fabric stays soft. So that my fabric stays soft and my wrinkles are not there. You don't want your wrinkles to be noticeable at all. In fact, as I look at this, I'm going to be blurring mostly for the background, right over here where our draped fabric is, and also a little bit behind our still life objects. I want those to be out of focus, really soft. So I'm going to bring it down, my opacity down just a little bit. So now I'm going to add a layer mask to this. So I click on my little layer mask here on the bottom of my layers dialog box. And I'm going to now use my gradient tool. So my gradient tool is on my vertical toolbar, and it shares the same location as my paint bucket tool. So I'm going to click on my gradient tool, and I'm going to drag it across my image. Now, you'll notice that I actually did the opposite of what I want to do. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to drag it from the bottom to the top. So what I've done now is I've removed the soft focus from the front of the fabric and also from some of my objects. Now I'm going to go in with my brush tool and I'm going to continue to remove the soft focus from my objects. I want my objects to be very sharp. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to use a brush, a nice soft brush, to remove the soft focus off of my objects. Okay, so I'm removing it off of my objects. And you'll notice that my helmet is starting to look much sharper than it was. Okay, so you're going to take the soft focus off of all your objects. Now be very careful when you go around the edges of your objects. You don't want to accidentally remove the soft focus from your background. If you go past, so if I were to click here, I'd actually be going past my still life objects, and then I would be removing the soft focus from my still life objects. We don't want that to happen. We want our still life objects to stay sharp, but the background needs to stay soft. So I'm going to go ahead and put the video on hold so that I can continue to do this. Okay, so now you'll start to notice that your silhouette forms on your layer mask over here, on your layer mask thumbnail. You'll see that it starts to form a silhouette of your objects. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and check my edges very carefully on my project here. I'm going to make sure that I didn't accidentally remove the soft focus from the background. And so it looks like I need to actually kind of go around my, whoops, edit, undo. Don't want to paint on my layer on accident here. I'm going to go around and just make sure that the soft focus is still on the background. So I have to check the edge. The edge is right here, and making sure that that soft focus is still on the fabric. So like right here I can see that the soft focus was kind of removed a little bit, so I'm going to put it back in and just kind of make sure it fits right next to my still life. Like the soft focus should go right to the edge of my objects. Right here, that needs to be soft, go right to the edge of my objects. Okay. So you see how I'm going around and just making sure that that soft focus still lines up right on the edge. Now I'm going to want to make my fabric a little bit softer still than what it is. So, because I used that gradient tool to remove some of the soft focus from the front here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to put back in some soft focus in the front here by using my brush tool and upping my opacity a little bit. And I'm going to make a little bit bigger brush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a little bit more soft focus here in the front, but not too much, okay? Now do you notice a difference here? Do you notice how the fabric is starting to look a little softer here? I'm going to zoom in so you can see that. So you can see that the fabric is starting to look a little bit softer. I'm controlling it by my opacity setting, which is set to 60, okay? And I'm kind of going in and just adding a little bit of soft focus to the fabric. And I'm going to be balancing that soft focus on the fabric out with the background soft focus. So when I zoom out, the background soft focus should be much more dominant than the front soft focus. The front soft focus, the area of the fabric that is closer to the camera, should be a little bit soft, but maybe not as soft as the background. Okay, the background should be much softer because it's further away from the camera. So I'm just going to go in and make sure that the front and the back really relate to each other well. The background should be much softer. The front should be a little bit soft, but not as soft as the back. And I may need to go back in and just take some of the soft focus off of my objects just a tad bit, because I did, when I was adding in that soft focus, I did go over my objects a little bit. So I'm just going to go in and sharpen a few areas on my objects here where I notice they're a little bit soft. Right here along the edge of my still life object. Just along the edges of my still life objects, I'm going to make sure they're sharp, and in the center as well. Making sure my still life objects look sharp. Okay, that's really important. Okay, so now I feel like this is starting to balance out pretty well between the background and the objects and the softness of the background. Okay, so the next step after this is to add in a vignette. I'm going to add in come down here to my add adjustment layer. I'm going to do solid color. And I'm going to put in a black vignette. I'm going to click on my layer mask. Make sure I have a nice big soft brush. Make sure my opacity is set to about 50%. And I'm going to click in my thumbnail layer mask, and I'm going to start to remove the vignette. Now I'm thinking before I add the vignette, I'm thinking that maybe I should crop my image now for my 8x10, because the vignette will be impacted by that crop. So let's click on the blur effect layer. Let's get rid of our vignette. Okay, I'm going to go in with my crop tool now. Clicking on my crop tool, I'm going to put in a width of 8, a height of 10, and a resolution of 300. And I'm going to drag this over, and I'm going to adjust it down so I have a little bit on the top here, a little bit on the bottom, and I'm going to click enter. Alright, so now I'm going to add in my solid vignette and work on that again. Okay, so now I'm going to remove the solid color, and you're going to start to notice that your layer mask is going to start to look like a black oval in the center. And you're going to have some black on the edges and edges on the top and on the bottom. And the vignette is great to help hide some of the wrinkles as well. So let's zoom in on that. And that's starting to look pretty good. And so now it's time to save your image. You're going to save it. You're going to go to file, make sure you're saving it all along, but you should definitely call this like still life 1 underscore, your first name, last name, or you could do your first initial last name underscore still life 1. And then when you do your second image, you'll call it still life 2, because you will be doing 2 images. You will be turning in 2 images. Make sure you save it in the P drive in the correct period folder. So if you're a period 1 student, you would save it in period 1, and you would save it in the file called still life. If you're a period 2 student, you would save it in period 2. If you're a period 3, you'd save it in period 3 folder, and so on.